Hi everyone, Laura Humm here, one of the Dialogue Doctor editors. I am with Faye Whyte again this week. Faye, I have been working with you for about a year now, and
Yes.
it is so much fun working with you. You want to tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and what you're writing?
Sure. I am a veterinarian by day, so I do my writing as stress relief. And this may sound crazy, but I do it early in the morning, before I go to work.
That does
I'm
sound
not a
crazy.
night owl at all. And for some reason in 2020, I felt that I should start learning how to write a novel. So you guys came along with the very first course that you offered, and I've just been stuck with you ever since.
Well, I wouldn't say stuck. I think that it's amazing that you have hung in with us, and you've not only did you do the first course, but you did the second course we did.
Yeah,
Um,
the character
the
voice.
character voice one. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So you've been with us. You're in the Slack channel.
Mhm.
You put a draft up almost every week with the writing prompt.
I try, and I'm trying to get back into the habit again for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you finding that those are fun for you or helpful?
Yeah, when I was less deep in editing world, it was really helpful to just have new ideas to
Mhm.
kind of riff for a week, and it was kind of a no obligation, no pressure way to get some drafting done. And I have used some of those scenes. Now that I'm doing more editing, I use it as as more of a circuit breaker, and so I'll pick up something weird off the internet and write a scene about it. So.
Yeah. This week, your scene was about Jorts the cat.
George the cat.
Yeah, thank you for introducing me to Jorts. I,
George is the best thing on the internet.
yep, yep. I hadn't heard about Jorts. So now I have, you've opened my world. So that's good. All right, so this week we are doing two scenes. The first one is your prologue, which is a
Right.
relatively new scene to your story.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
I think this is the first time I've seen it. Is that true? Did I see it once before?
Um, you might have seen it once briefly as a really rough draft.
Okay, yeah. And then the second scene is a kid's scene.
Mhm.
So you want to tell the listeners a little bit about who Abby is in the story?
Sure. So the story is based on Ruth, who is a powered, basically superhero mom. So she's a mom. She's separated from her ex. And Abby actually lives with the ex, and so Ruth wants to try and spend as much time with Abby as she can. Abby is a 12-year-old who worships her mother, even though other people don't. And later on in the story, Abby's going to have some really big action scenes. So I needed to start to show how she would act in a stressful situation.
Excellent. And one of the things that I love about your Abby character is she is like quintessential 12, right? Like she's 12 going on 40. She thinks she's an adult, and yet at the same time, she really loves that kind of bonding time with her mom. But she's pretty precocious. She kind of says what's on her mind. She sees herself as like strong and independent, which is really great. And this scene that you gave me is with her peers. It starts a little bit with her mom, but it's mostly with her peers. So I think that's really great. What I like about these two scenes, and while it seemed kind of like random that they were both this week, what I really like about them is the strengths of both of them. Um, really pair nicely together also with the types of edits that we're doing. So the intro scene, you want to tell us a bit about who Sela is?
So Sela is someone in the world who was one of the powered people when things started to go dystopian. She is kind of a mentor figure to Ruth, and runs the local orphanage that will also become the superheroes hideout.
Excellent. So she, again, very strong, very independent, knows who she is, kind of has, not only keeps her own stuff together, but keeps everybody around her stuff together. So I think that's really great. The other thing I really like about this scene is you gave us a really creative way of entering the world without having to explain everything to us. Now, there are a couple places in this where I gave you a heads up beforehand, but there are a couple places in it where there are places where I think you can add a sentence or two of prose where you can give us just a little bit more of the backstory. But as we look at it together, you'll see like the way that you created the scene and the you have 2 paragraphs of prose as your second and third paragraphs. And I read it and I was like, oh, is there a way to cut this prose? Because you know how I feel about prose. And really, like, I moved one line. Other than that, like, you really kind of need those 2 paragraphs where they are. So
Well, thank you.
you won me over on prose this week. So
Wait till Jeff sees the italics I'm going to introduce him to.
oh, well, it's funny because in both scenes, I added italics in a couple of places.
Excellent.
So Jeff and I, so for those of you who are listening, Jeff and I talk about this on the podcast sometimes, but really where the italics conversation comes in the most is on the Slack channel. I think every week somebody needles Jeff about his lack of use of italics. And my response to the use of italics every time is italics are really important, but you have to use them right. Like, you can't just use italics for everything all the time because then the reader doesn't know what to do with it. But you can use it to highlight a specific word that you want somebody to put emphasis on. Mm-hmm. Or I actually used it in the Abby scene because you have Abby talking to herself at one point, and you really needed it to kind of pull that apart from the rest of the line. So yeah, so Jeff, if you are anti-italics today, or if you are team anti-italics like Jeff is, I feel like there's a poll coming on the Slack channel this week about team italics or not. I feel like, so if you're there, we'll try to give you a warning, an italics warning, so you can just skip ahead. So anyway, all right. Any questions before we get started?
No, I'm good to go.
All right. I feel like we've been working together for so long that we're probably just used to jumping into this. Mm-hmm. So let's start with the Sela scene because it's the prologue.
Okay.
All right. So in your starting here, you've got Billy Burrow, who you describe as a jolly young constable who preferred the night shift in this part of town. Which is really great because, like, I have this picture of Billy in my head. It's probably not the picture you have of Billy, but which of course is the joy of reading, right? Like, we can all kind of picture our characters ourselves. But I picture Billy as the constable in Justified. So that's kind of who I have in my head. Probably not who you pictured, but maybe.
Yeah, Mike and Molly.
Mike and Molly. Okay. Yeah. All right. So pretty close. Not quite, but pretty close. All right. All right. So, boy, am I glad to see you, he says. And this is where you give us 2 full paragraphs of prose. Sorry. You tell us about the red and blue lights strobing across the face. So basically what's happened is they're in a neighborhood and something went down and somebody's in the back of a police car. This is where I made a quick change. So you have Constable Barlow. You must have had an excellent reason to get me out of bed in the middle of the night. I actually took that second half of the line and I moved it a little bit lower because the next line you have Billy saying after Sela describes herself and kind of her role, which was really great. And again, this is where I kind of went back and forth about whether this paragraph of prose really needs to be there. And ultimately, again, you won me over. So then this is where we get to, Billy says, it's just Billy, ma'am, you know that. And then I think it went directly into Billy saying why he called her. So rather than doing that, what I did is I added a line for Sela that says, all right, Billy in italics, because she's emphasizing the word. We as the reader need to know that there's emphasis there. And then I took that line you had from earlier, which was so great. You must have an excellent reason to get me out of bed in the middle of the night. I almost smiled, right? Like, so for breaking those two up, it gives us that opportunity to kind of see the difference in, like, we're holding out that scene for the back and forth the way that it would typically happen. Because if she says, you must have an excellent reason to get me out of bed in the middle of the night, likely he's only going to respond to that, and he's not going to say just Billy. Because in real conversations, when we use these complex sentences and complex questions, typically people forget the first half and only respond to the second half. Sometimes they respond to both, but then that gets complicated for the reader. So just breaking it out and letting it be kind of a back and forth feels really natural to the reader, even though in real life, it likely happened the way that you had it. I mean, if this were real life, right? Like, it likely would have happened the way that you said. Just makes it a little easier for the reader. So then we go on to, she responds with, don't you have a youth services worker on call? Initially, you had Billy responding with, yeah, well, but it looks like shenanigans again. And then there's a background about what he thinks shenanigans are. And then he says, and anyway, tonight, Patty's the youth service worker on call. And then Sela was responding about why Patty isn't like the best person and why she would get called. So instead of doing it that way, where I as the reader kind of had to follow where Billy was, I turned it around to make it the picture a little bit easier for me as the reader. Don't you have the youth services worker on call? Tonight it's Patty, right? Like, he doesn't have to say anything else, because Sela is going to tell us Patty was good at rules, excellent at paperwork. I couldn't wait for her to be promoted. Tell me about the incident. And then Billy can say, it looks like shenanigans again. Sela can have her sidebar on what shenanigans mean. And then Billy can continue into the details of actually what happened. And it makes the scene run a little bit more smoothly for me as the reader, without having to like jump back and forth. Thoughts, comments?
No, that's great. It looks, yeah, it goes much more smoothly now.
Great. And again, one of the things that you'll see here, and anyone who's listening at home, as you're reading and you're editing and you're kind of doing a gut check on your edits, most of the time you don't need to write new stuff, right? Like, in these, it shows up on the screen as all new content, because sometimes in Word, when I move stuff around, it shows as green moved and other times it doesn't. And I can't really figure out the formula for why sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. But other than, all right, Billy, maybe, I think this was all your language that I just moved around in different places.
Yep.
So just feel free to, like, if something doesn't feel like it's flowing right, just pick stuff up and move it around. So
cool.
All right, then we get into unofficially what happened. I ran my fingers over the beads of my bag, which is a nice, like, body language element of I can see Sela doing this to kind of calm herself and keep herself like in the moment. So I thought that was a really nice insertion of body language, because there isn't a lot of body language in other places here, but this is the right time to do it because it kind of keeps the slowness of the pace of the scene going, which is really important because you need the reader to be able to understand the details of what's happening in the scene because you're feeding them a lot of information. You're creating two characters, you're giving us the backstory. So your pacing is really great in the scene. So kudos on that.
Thank you.
You know, anytime you can get me to agree that prose is important, I feel like you get the win. All right. So now Billy gives us this background about like you didn't hear this from me, but I'm going to tell you kind of my gut reaction on this. So neighbor hears the ruckus and all hell breaks loose. Mm-hmm. Then you've got Sela asking this really important question of the neighbor cuffed. Billy is a police officer or a constable. When I read cuffed here, I thought handcuffs.
Yep, of course.
But it wasn't until the next line where Billy's saying her restrictor alert didn't go off that I realized that, oh, wait, this isn't the cuffs that Faye has created in her world. It's not handcuffs, it's the cuffs that you created in your world. So this is one of those rare places that actually happened 3 times in the scene where I would say, give Sela one of those really great self-thinking about like these stupid new cuffs are meant to control or whatever, okay. That something that helps us understand that the neighbor isn't the one in the back of the police car, or maybe she is the one in the back of the police car, but that we're talking about it very specifically. So then he says that, you know, her alert didn't go off. The boyfriend exited through the plate glass window. I love what you do with Billy's voice here. And you're constant with him throughout. It's really strong. He's like this kind of like metaphorical, right? Like he sees everything, like his world is pretty bleak. And yet he finds this way of like elevating what's happening to make it almost picturesque and poetic. And when you described him to me, and now that you're saying like the Mike and Molly kind of thing, I can definitely see like that buoyancy that you're going for him in this like dystopia of a world where it would be really easy for him to like just kind of hate life. And hate everything that he's seeing time and time again, which I think also kind of goes to this place of why Sela and how you're describing her is really connected to him and why she's willing to get out of bed in the middle of the night to answer his calls. So I think you did a really great job with that.
Thank you.
So then you've got Sela asking, she's not a kinetic. Again, you're giving us great backstory, but giving us one line about what a kinetic is or how, and I don't know if you can see the notes here. Maybe my screen's not big enough. There it is. Okay. You know, just a quick rundown of what the kinetic's powers are. It doesn't have to be big. I wouldn't, you know, if you start giving me 2 or 3 paragraphs of prose, I'm probably going to say, okay, this is nice, but just go back to that. Mm-hmm. Maybe she says, typically a kinetic is able to blah, blah, blah. Then Billy can go back to what he's saying with, I've never met a telepath who can smash a grown man through a window, right? So like he's giving us a little bit of that, but you know, we want to have just a little bit. Oh, sorry, I missed a line. She's down as a telepath. No telepath I've ever met could push a grown man through a window. Then I added, Sela considered this for a moment. Maybe you want to add something about telepath's powers. Maybe you don't need to, because if you add information about a kinetic in the line before, and then he says telepaths, right? Like you might not need to, but you might need to. But okay. What you want to do is you want to slow this down, because now it's feeling very much like an interrogation, right? So the neighbor's door, the next door neighbor hears the ruckus, neighbor cuffed, yeah, but this, she's not a kinetic, yeah, but this, did she have help, this, right? Like it's very back and forth. It's feeling like it's not a partnership now. It's feeling like she's like interrogating him. So you want to just take that moment for Sela to consider this for the moment. Maybe she has this other thought. And then did she have help? Now it feels collaborative again. I wouldn't make that suggestion on the neighbor cuffed and she's not kinetic, because you're going to use those as areas where you can give a little bit of backstory, which is again going to make it feel to the reader like it's a conversation, because she's thinking about things that we're thinking about. And then it's going to feel like she's really giving what he's saying consideration, as opposed to she's just peppering him with these short questions.
And also what I could do, instead of did she have help, I could say something like, do you think she had help? So that
Perfect.
She's asking him for his opinion.
I really like that. I'll make that change for you. So when you get it back, you'll have it in your track pages. So, and then he says, again, mind control made him jump. She jokes with him, mind control, truly. And then he goes into this, anything's possible these days. And then she says back, I could blow your mind with how much is not possible these days. And this is a place, and I missed it in my first read. I'm going to italicize those nots. Sorry, non-italic readers, listeners. Again, the not possible is the really important thing in this scene, or excuse me, in this line. So jumping in there would be really important. Okay, so then he says, kind of going back to what's happening at hand, he's not really responding to the fact that not everything is possible, which makes a lot of sense, especially for what his role is. And he says there's a couple of other things that don't make sense. She says, I wondered, so why confess? And then he starts in with the not only. So this I wondered, is this something that she's thinking to herself, or is she saying it out loud? But this is another place where it feels to me as the reader like it was a really quick topic change, that you wanted to give me some information here, but then we got cut off by the next part of the scene. But this understanding of like, why there's a confession, like how does she know that somebody has confessed? Like we haven't really seen that yet. So in the margin here, I just wrote quick topic change. This is where you're going to want to spend another 2 or 3 lines telling us what doesn't make sense. You could just make it so there are a few other things that don't make sense. He glanced down at his notepad. I'm not really sure why she confessed, blah, blah, blah. And like, just give us that little bit more. It doesn't necessarily have to be a back and forth. But I'm going to guess what happened here. And maybe this isn't what happened, but for those people who are listening, what's happening here is Faye has this really great conversation going. And then the next line is from inside a shriek. I could feel her, the sudden weakness in my knees, this wave of dizziness and nausea. The intensity took me by surprise. So you've got this flashbang moment, right? Where you want the reader to kind of like stop what they're doing and move forward. So it almost feels to me like as a writer, you were getting into this conversation about not knowing why it makes sense, but knowing that you've got this flashbang moment that you want coming. So like you truncated the conversation just a little bit too early because you were excited to get to this really exciting moment. And that works, right? There are lots of times where big things happen right at critical, important moments. But it feels like you're trying to tell us something here. Give us a moment to follow up with it before you distract us from it.
Sure.
Just because otherwise, like, which emotion am I supposed to feel? Am I supposed to feel like this excitement and intensity of, oh, there's something else that doesn't make sense? Or am I supposed to feel the emotional intensity of the fact that somebody inside is screaming, right? Like, and probably a youth, because we know earlier that she's called specifically because little kids are involved, right? So like, I wasn't really sure how to feel there. So then we get to the next part where you've got a scream of no, fell, come here, you little. I recognize the voice. Oh, hell, that didn't sound good. Billy broke for the door, but I got to the building first. And then you describe the grassy area outside the apartment looked like a tornado. And then there's the conversation with you, Patty. So like in the margin here, I mentioned that there's like a timing issue. To me, you hear this shriek inside, and I couldn't figure out if the no was the shriek from inside or if no followed the shriek. If no is the shriek, I would actually suggest moving it to from inside a shriek, no, the scream. I could feel for her. I could feel her, the sudden weakness. And then I couldn't tell if fell was somebody else's voice or the follow-up to that.
Okay. So just a few words to differentiate that?
Yeah, so one voice and then another voice, a child's voice and a child that sounded a little bit older, something that like orients me to what's happening here. And then you do a great job of describing Patty's voice. Mm-hmm. If Patty's the one who screams no, or if Patty was the shriek, like, right, like help orient me to that.
Okay.
Billy saying, oh, hell, that doesn't sound good and broke for the door. I got to the building first. Feels to me like it needs to go right after the shriek. Like mm-hmm. These things are happening at the same time. Maybe not. Maybe they just go directly before come here, you little, right? Like, so mm-hmm. It's the no, the fell, oh, hell, that doesn't sound good. We're heading to the door. As we're heading to the door, come here, you little, whatever. That all makes sense to me. The reason I didn't move anything around here and I just put the timing issue in the margin is because I wasn't sure what you as the writer were going for here, right? Like if you're going for that, like this whole thing, no, fell, come here, you little, all is like one kind of utterance, then I would organize that a little bit differently than if it's like the shriek and then we're moving and then we're hearing the no, fell, come here is all the follow-up to that. So you as the author are going to kind of want to decide what you want to do there.
Okay.
This part about the grassy area outside and the shards of glass and then Patty standing in the doorway. If Billy's breaking for the door, but she got there first, how is Patty standing in the doorway? So like this is where the timing kind of doesn't feel right to me. You might want to take this element of the grassy area just outside the apartment, look like a tornado, and move this up again. I'm moving prose around up to where he says that we got a call when the boyfriend exited through the plate glass window.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, that's great.
Maybe you put it right here. So the grassy area outside the apartment looked like, now let's see if it's going to move it or if it's just going to show a change. No, just a change. So now you're seeing the aftermath of the plate glass window with the tornado hitting it. Yep. And then you don't need it right here in this moment as we get to the doorway. So perhaps it's, I got to the building first, Patty exited the door as I got there, right? Like, yep. So instead of standing, it just gives it just a little different of a beat there. And then you go into, you okay, Patty? I could see the damage to the skin. The little shit bit me. Perfect, because that's exactly the type of utterance someone would say in that moment. Right. And then, of course, Sela is the voice of reason. Go let the paramedics, and then the conversation about the rabies. All of that is really, really great. There was something earlier that I wanted to point out that I missed. Yes, here it is. Nope. Where is it? Okay. So that's kind of where I stopped in this edit here,
Okay.
because you're about to change kind of into, we're about to meet the kids.
Mhm.
So I kind of stopped there because I wanted to do kid voices in the other, because we
Sure.
know Abby in the other. But there's just one other small thing that I want to mention to you that I put in the notes here. When you're talking up here about Billy saying that there were shenanigans and you're giving the rundown of what a strange one was,
Mhm.
you use the phrase back then before official disease status.
Mhm.
That's a different time frame. Everything else is happening in the present tense, that this scene is happening in the present tense, but this one phrase of back then before his official disease status makes it feel like she's recounting this episode to someone in the future.
Okay.
So I would just make a change here that says something like, they haven't identified official statuses yet for the dicors, or whatever the name of, I can never remember how you spell that, or
Oh,
how
X course, yeah.
X course, thank you. Right, so something again that is orienting us to the current situation without thinking about it. Now, Sela obviously becomes an important character throughout, so it makes sense for her to like, this is a flashback, but you haven't used anything else in this moment as a flashback. Everything else in this moment is happening in the present tense. So that was my last note for you.
Great.
But I would say overall, like, great job with this scene. You know, I moved a couple of things for pacing, but for the most part, like,
Great.
you
Thank
almost don't even need me anymore. But I don't want to
Oh.
say that because I want to read the book before everybody else does. All right, any questions about this one before we jump into the other voice?
No, that's great.
Okay.
Yeah, I see your changes and thank you for them.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I have to stop sharing and then I have to start sharing again. So Abby's voice, and you and I chat about this all the time. I'm very passionate about youth voices. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say other than I'm passionate about them. Kids speak very differently than adults do. And I know you've heard this from me before, Faye, but for people listening who haven't heard me say this every time I read a scene with a kid in it, kids are very egocentric. They're focusing on themselves first, especially when you have a 12-year-old who's in that stage where up to now the whole world has been about them. And now they have to start focusing on what the rest of the world is. And 12 is a fun age also because it's this like, this push and pull about, I'm an adult, I'm going to speak like an adult, but really I'm still speaking like a kid. Everything is about how my feelings and my gut and whatever. It's really hard for adults to write kids' voices, even adults who are surrounded by children all the time, because as an adult, we think like an adult, right? Like we learn to process information in a linear fashion. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and an end. Typically, as adults, especially the more formal education we get, we frame language based off of beginning, middle, and end. It's how we're taught, right? Like think back to like first grade when they're teaching you how to write a sentence. They're teaching you sentence structure, noun, verb, maybe adjective, noun, verb, maybe adjective, noun, adverb, verb, right? Like there's the structure to things. And then they teach you how to write paragraphs, and they tell you that paragraphs have to have 3 to 5 sentences, and there has to be a beginning intro paragraph or intro topic, and then details, and then a closing, right? Like there's structure. And then we learn, as we go into our education, we learn about flow and there has to be a thesis. I was helping my friend's daughter write a paper right before the holiday break. And the teacher had this really great outline that was like, you need your introduction, and then you need your thesis, and then you need, right. And she was writing thesis sentences and topic sentences. And she was asking me like, well, how do you structure these? And I'm like, so it's in the 8th grade when we learn how to structure a paper like this, right?
Cool.
And then it's just reinforced. So as we get older, that guttural response of I'm going to tell the story, like, how was school today? There was a red balloon. Well, what does that have to do with how school was today? And then, that 45-minute story to get back to, and some kid brought a red balloon in and the teacher took it away, right? Like, but it starts with the red balloon.
Yeah. We used to, how was your day? It was good. What did you do? We did things. And what else? Stuff.
Right. Exactly. They don't know how to communicate.
Things and stuff.
Right. Things and stuff. But at the same time, things and stuff isn't exciting for us as a reader. So we have to think about how to take things and stuff and create it so it's kind of this hybrid between the way kids talk and the way that adults think. So I played around with your dialogue a lot here. So what I really like about this scene in juxtaposition of the one that we just read is the one that we just read, all I did was move your lines around just to make the conversation flow better. I actually, in this scene, took the theme of what you were saying from an adult's voice, and I put it in my secret decoder ring, and I popped out what teenage girl says, because one of my little known skill sets is that I speak teenager. So not cool kid teenager, like super uber nerd teenager, but I understand and can kind of talk to them. It's one of my superpowers. Anyway, I guess one shouldn't brag about their superpowers. So, but also like, I don't know who really wants that superpower. So anyway, okay. So originally the scene started with Abby zipped around the car waiting for Ruth to pop the trunk. The hockey bag was hard to lift so high, but she leaned in and got it onto her back. I changed that to be, I got it, Abby shouted to her mother as she zipped around the car. Sets the stage for Abby, who is this preteen who has this idea that she's going into the ice rink by herself. What is she going to say to help encourage her mother to just stay in the car? But I got it, right? Like immediately starting with this I statement kind of orients us to Abby, right? But then mom was there, hand on the bag, holding her sticks. How can I help? I'm good, Abby said, reaching for the sticks, wobbling under the bag. All that's yours. Great. Then you have Ruth saying, Abs, let me carry something, okay? So this is where initially you were going into Abby's kind of thought process of stupid adults, don't lie, don't tell your mother, and like all the things her dad was saying. I changed it around to be that 12-year-old, I can do it, right? Like this, just stay out of my way, right? Like this staccato voice. And then I changed stupid adults to stupid parents. Very small wording change, but to a kid, it's parents, it's not adults, right? Like their frame of reference isn't large enough to be adults. It's parents, especially in this case where it's comparing dad to mom. So then this next part I actually did to help us as the readers kind of orient to what was happening with this piece of dialogue, because I had to read it twice to realize don't lie, don't let your mother come into the arena was not Abby talking, it was her dad talking.
Okay.
Also, for those of you who can't see the screen, stupid parents is italicized because it's what Abby is thinking. Again, appropriate way to use italics here because you have words coming out of Abby's mouth and you have what she's thinking. So using italics in this instance is okay. I think we're actually going to title the name of this episode Faye Whyte and the Italics Debate. I won't tell Jeff that ahead of time. We want him to listen. Okay, so her dad was such a jerk. You had initially had it later about she didn't understand why he was being such a jerk about it, or did he have to be such a jerk about it? Which I liked the intensity of like 12-year-old thinking about dad being a jerk. But for the reader, I just wanted to kind of move that to the beginning. Her dad was such a jerk, telling her, don't lie, don't let your mother come to the arena with you, but don't tell her I said. And then you've got Abby thinking, don't again. So again, I just put that in italics.
Okay.
And then again, just to orient the reader a little bit, I added Abby guessed in front of he was kind of right. Telling her would probably hurt her feelings. So then the language that you had here from Abby was, don't you have to get to the covenant or something? Don't you have bracelets you need to hand out? Again, that's very organized thinking. Excuse me. So I changed around. It was also a little bit snarkier than you typically have Abby being.
Yeah, it was.
So I wanted to kind of dial the snarkiness back, not to say that 12-year-old girls are not like the queen of snark, but 12-year-olds in general, I shouldn't gender the fact that 12-year-olds are snarky, like they all are. But you don't have Abby being snarky in other places most of the time.
Yep. So
I changed it to, I don't want you to be late. Again, I don't, instead of don't you, very focused on I. That, so she adjusted the bag again. Again, that's just a small amount of body language just to remind us that here's this 12-year-old holding a huge bag of hockey equipment. And if anybody's ever seen a bag of hockey equipment, they know how large it is. It's almost the same size as a 12-year-old. Probably Abby and her friend could curl up inside of this bag, right? Like, okay, so, and you've got bracelets and the covenant, right? Or convent, not covenant. Yep. Convent, yes, that is the right spelling of that word, right? Like, so it's not this articulate, don't you have to go there and do this thing? The bracelets and the convent are together as one thing in her mind. Okay. Now you'll notice, didn't make any changes to Ruth's voice. Ouch. Mm-hmm. Am I that embarrassing, right? Like, that's parents' voice. That's what they say. So initially you had Abby saying something like, well, some of the parents, again, too much thinking for a kid. Her response to that is going to be, Mom, right? Like this. And if you use the interrobang here, people are going to just like hear that 12-year-old voice, right? Like that's what we hear. And any parent, or any person who has ever heard a kid like whine at their parent using their name knows exactly how this is being said, right? Like, okay, so then this is actually where I made a slight change to Ruth. Ruth would back off and be like, okay. She ran her fingers over the cuff, rubbing the new bracelet. Sorry, Abby said. And you had kissing her mother, which I think was really important. But again, we want to go back to this place about she's trying to do something that's different than she's ever done before. So I wanted to add this. She leaned forward to kiss her mother, being careful not to lose her balance because of the heavy bag. I'll see you after, Kay. Because again, this idea of like, I'm leaving. This is what's going to happen, right? It's that 12-year-old power struggle. I'm going to give you what you want because I'm going to see you, but it's going to be on my terms afterward. Okay. And then I just added that Ruth laughed. What if someone sees you getting a hug from your mom? Then you had this really great line from Abby that says, no one's going to say anything, I'm a goon. Again, that's how adults think. So I just turned it around. Abby's going to respond with, I'm a goon. The risk of getting teased for showing feelings was worth making that real smile again. They won't say anything. And again, anything in italics. It's your same line, just secret decoded into the way kids talk, because it's this idea that like the most important thing to them comes first. And in this case, in her mind, the most important thing is I'm a goon. So nobody's going to say anything. So we just flip that around. So then this end of the scene kind of felt a little bit sad, kind of going back to this fact that we were initially talking about there's an embarrassment with Ruth going in because whatever. So I just changed it to make it a little bit lighter, because all of your other scenes with Ruth and Abby have this really light, fun banter to them. And I thought this was a really good opportunity to see that. So I just added, you had Stick on the Ice, Sweetheart. So I just pulled Sweetheart out and threw Goon in there, so that her mother's kind of like in this joke about nobody's gonna, mess with you.
Cool.
And then you have Abby saying, yup. I would just make a suggestion there that if you can give Abby something more fun to say to her mom, watch out, or I don't know, you'll find something in Abby's voice that's like, but you have such fun banter between the two of them in other places where they kind of have this like quippy back and forth. So I would just suggest that you throw something in there.
Okay.
So then, and I would make that, and you don't have to keep this, but I added, she shouted over her shoulder as she entered into the arena, right? Like just this one more element of like, this is my parting shot as a 12-year-old. I'm going to get the last word on my mom, right? Like something along those lines.
Okay, cool. Yep.
Then you have this great paragraph of prose that helps orient us to what it's like to enter an ice rink. And I don't know if you know this about me or not, but in my late 20s, I decided that I was going to play ice hockey. Ice hockey was not a sport in my house growing up. Everything was all things baseball and football. Anything else wasn't a real sport. I pushed the boundaries in high school when I played field hockey. But in my early 20s, I started working in a bar and they played ice hockey all the time. So I would watch it and I would be so fascinated. I'd be like, I'm going to play the sport. I'm going to play the sport. I'm going to play the sport. Finally, I decided when I was 28 that I had to put up or shut up, and I had to learn how to skate, and I had to learn how to play. And I did. And I played for a whole year. And then I was playing in the league that I shouldn't have been playing in because they were way better than me. And I fell on the ice and I broke my ankle. And my dreams of Olympic glory were forever shattered. So a plate, some screws, and a lot of rehab later. I've been back on the ice one time and I was terrified. But the reason that I bring that up is your description of the ice rink was so in the moment realistic to me. Like all the things that actually happen in the ice rink were brilliant. They were written in an adult's voice, right? Like everything was happening. I'm trying to see, Abby took a deep breath.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like Abby took a deep breath and smelled the smell from the concession stand, popcorn and fries. She opened the heavy doors to the rink and was hit with the funny smell that stung her nose. Right. So I just took that imagery and I turned it around to be 12-year-old. She smelled the popcorn and fries from the concession. The funny sour smell stung her nose as she opened the heavy doors to the rink. Right. Like then getting into the game was in full swing, shouts and clashes and scrapes and echoing off the ice. She opened the locker room door and the smell got worse. Right. So all of that imagery of what it's like to walk into an ice rink, but put into a 12-year-old's mind, right? Perfect. Like it's the smell we're smelling first, not like the sights and the sounds.
I played hockey too. I'm Canadian, so of course I played hockey.
I feel like when you say you're Canadian, it's just assumed that you played hockey.
Yes, I played hockey in university, and I actually took a couple of lessons from Cassie Campbell. So
really,
there you go, brush with fame.
Wow.
And I was never very good, and I was the goon. So,
I mean, so this story is a little autobiographical.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Excellent. Well, that explains why. And I feel like if you've never played hockey, you don't have the same sense of what it's like. There's that scene in The Cutting Edge from like 4 million years ago, where he talks about there's the picture of him. Somebody drew a picture of him smelling the ice, and how they like talk about the ice has a smell. And like watching that movie, because I ice skated maybe 5 times my whole life before I learned to skate to play hockey. I was never in an ice rink. I didn't like, I thought it was like a cute scene in the movie, but I never understood it until I started playing hockey, and the smell of the ice right after the Zamboni, like there, you can't even describe it. It's really neat to kind of like be transported back. And I think that that's the power of like good fiction, is that it really kind of draws us into the realities of life. So nice job, author.
Cool. Oh,
I know you like to think of yourself as like a learning author, but there's some skill here that you just have naturally as a storyteller that I think is really great. So
thank you.
All right. So now we get into Abby and her friend. So you have Abby, you have Jordan sitting alone. Again, it was the only person in the locker room was Jordan. She was sitting alone in a normal place. She didn't look right. So I changed that a little bit just to make it Jordan was sitting alone in a normal place. And I changed she didn't look right to something was wrong. Again, thought versus feeling, right? Like Abby has this gut that something is wrong. We as adults think she didn't look right. It's very small semantics that if that was the only thing in the whole story, I probably just would have left it. But if the theme is to take this really cerebral adult thinking and move it back to this like intuition, kid action first kind of, it's one of the small things that I would change. So you have Abby sitting down next to her line mate, opening her bag. Jordan kept her eyes on her stick. Hey, you initially went into, so my mom brought me today. She almost came in. That could have been a real, and I can't remember the description you used. Could have been a real bad case or whatever. I added this moment of you okay? And yeah, because going back to this moment of something's wrong, if kids think something's wrong, they're just going to ask about it, right? Like they don't, adults have this tendency to kind of like feel people out about whether or not they want to talk about things, right? Like the how are you today is often just intended to be substituted for hi, and the answer is good and we just move on, and like we're feeling people out. Kids don't know those social graces yet. So she's going to jump right in and she's going to say, you okay? She's going to take her friend at her word with the yeah, and then she's going to go with mom brought me today. And I just, again, took out just small things from my mom. Again, just those tend to be things that adults say versus kids jump right in because they're taught noun, subject, or the subject, which is a noun, and then a verb and whatever. So a little bit shorter there. She wanted to come in. And I took out that could have been really messy or whatever it was that you had, because this idea that if you're italicizing the word wanted, or you could italicize come instead of wanted. So she wanted to come in, right? Like if you italicize the come in, something in, by italicizing something in this sentence, it helps show that there's, do you need me to pause so you can get that? No? Okay. It shows that like, okay, something bad is going to happen. And again, as adults, we can read the scene and read between the lines to know that a kid isn't going to necessarily need to explain how bad it's going to be, especially because in about a half a page, you have Bellamy's mom coming in. So this is really kind of nice foreshadowing for that. So then you've got Jordan doing this sure, which is perfectly great because again, Jordan's probably a 12-year-old, and when they're upset, they don't talk. So that worked really good. So then you had Abby saying about, I talked her down, I'm old, I can carry my bag by myself. So rather than that, I turned it around to be like, but I grabbed my bag real quick and said goodbye, right? Like, this is how I fixed the problem. And then you've got a little bit of prose there, which again is really good because it kind of like orients to what's happening in the locker room. Cool. And then Abby with the, I've been working out, see these guns. She flexes her arms. Her friend says, sure again. This is where I wanted to take some of the prose that you had in other places about how Jordan would act before the game. And I just wanted to put it in Abby's voice. This is not how Jordan acted before the game, especially when they're playing an older team. You had a paragraph that was like, Jordan is the first one in the locker room because when they're playing the older team, she wants to be the first one on the ice, blah, blah, blah. Again, it was really great information. It just felt out of place for a way a 12-year-old thinks. So just peppering it in here gives the reader the same information, but just in a different voice. So then this is where I put in brackets, which of course, you know, as working with me for a long time, when I put something in brackets, it means I'm taking some editorial liberties here. You should fill in something that feels more character realistic.
Okay.
But this is where kids like to push the envelope, right? Like especially 12-year-olds. When kids are 5 and 6 and 7 and they're talking at their parents and their parents aren't listening and they're going, yep, that sounds interesting, honey, right? Like 6 and 7-year-olds don't really get that. When you get to 12, you know when somebody's not listening to you, and you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to throw a fit because somebody's not listening to you, or you're going to see how far you can get away with pushing the envelope. In this case, because it's her friend, it didn't feel appropriate for her to do the first. So I added this, and I got superpowers from an alien, right? Like, and it doesn't have to be that, but like something, maybe it's, and I skate and I ran into Gretzky in the, you know, at the concession stand, you know, like something that's like really outrageous. And then Jordan can just say, At that point, there's a turning point in the conversation. She's either going to lean into it or she's going to back away. You had her kind of leaning into it with, are you nervous about the game? But again, that's projection that adults tend to do. Kids don't. Kids are going to go in the moment with what's wrong with you. Jordan's going to respond with nothing. And then this is the second half of that paragraph about how Jordan likes to respond to the bigger players. So Abby tried to ignore the nagging feeling she was having. How many times do you think the refs would let you get away with a hip check when you pretend you can't stop and say sorry? Jordan called it girl checking, right? So it was this paragraph that you had about Jordan liked to do what she called girl check, and there was the explanation. I just turned it around and put it into Abby's mouth in a way that feels like Abby's like, okay, well, if she's not going to answer the real question, maybe she's going to answer this other question. Jordan just shrugs. Jordan, what's up? She started another layer of tape, right? Like, doesn't have to be anything big. That's really great. She responds with nothing. And then you've got this really cute, are you in love or something? You're not in love with or something, are you? I just shortened it a little bit to make it just you in love or something stupid, right? Like that's the way kids talk. I loved it. I'm fine. And again, I threw the period after the I'm, so it becomes I'm fine instead of I'm fine. Which again, it's such a small thing, but as a reader, it reads really differently to me when 2 words are 2 sentences instead of 1 sentence. It's just weird how the brain works like that. And then Abby confronts her with, why are you putting a 3rd layer of tape on your blade? Jordan realized it. My mom didn't want me to come. So then you had Abby saying, here, I'll fix the stick, you get dressed, whatever. To me, her mom doesn't want her to come. Abby's 12. What's the first thing she's going to say? Why? And then she can take the stick and tap it on Jordan's bag to tell her to get dressed without having to say the words, I'll do this and then you do that, right? Like kids communicate very physically. Okay. So she started to smooth the tape the way Jordan liked it. And then you had the door banged open, but I just added, just again to orient the reader, Jordan was about to say something when the door opened with a bang. 3 other girls bustled in, and then I just added in the last one, held the door for Bellamy and her mom, to show that it was 3 girls plus Bellamy. So now we've got 4 other people plus a mom in the locker room. So then all of this was really good about Mrs. Driscoll and why she's in the locker room, and how they do the sing-songy thing to both say hello and to make Bellamy pout, which again, brilliant. And then Bellamy's mom asking, do you need anything else, sweetie? You had Bellamy saying, I think I forgot my water bottle. In my head, Bellamy is a princess brat. So instead of saying, I think I forgot my water bottle, she's going to be like, my water bottle, right? Like, you want to just slap the sass right off her face.
Okay.
Her mom says, and Faye, maybe I'm doing this just for my own amusement, but right? Like,
that's where a lot of this comes from anyways.
I do always feel when I edit a scene with a kid in it that I need to call my mother and apologize for being 12 and 13 and 14 and 15 and all the other years in between. Mm-hmm. So I packed 2 right here on the end of your bag, because again, I see her mom being like super supportive and right. And then instead of her saying the one I like with the electrolytes, I see her seeing the one I like, right? Right. And then Abby thinking she was so spoiled. And then her mom can be like, yes, the add a color or flavor with the electrolytes, right? Like her mom is still whatever. And then Bellamy's not going to say thank you. She's not, right. Like her response is going to be like, good. Right. Because again, she's super brat. We just want to smack her around. Right. So then we can do this scene that you have where Abby, and again, the beats in your scene, the actions in your scene are spot on, right? Like what's happening around works really well. My job here was just to turn it around and make it feel like it's a bunch of 12-year-olds having a conversation. So Abby looked at Jordan for her usual eye roll and comments about Bellamy never sweating, versus the Jordan typically would say something about Bellamy never sweating, right? Just turning it around so it's Abby's perspective. Aside from a chance to brag about how much the goalie pads cost, they suspected that she was a goalie, so she didn't have to skate. But Jordan didn't even look up from her bag and equipment. So Abby, this actually needs to be Abby leaned in. So I just added this, like, Abby's going to do a check now. Seriously, you okay? And then adding Jordan just shrugged again. At this point, like you were just moving directly into going from Bellamy to Cheryl, who's Bellamy's bestie. But again, we want to orient the reader to the fact that this is Abby's story. So we need to make sure, even though Bellamy and her new friend, Cheryl, are, well, not her new friend, new to us, are going to be like the side characters that are really big. We want to make sure that we're still telling it as Abby's story by orienting them to Abby. So I actually just want to take a second here and talk about how big your side characters are here, because this is a conversation you and I have had quite a bit about, like, how big should a side character be? What can we do with their voices? How far can we push them? And this is like the exact right place to push a character. Bellamy is snippy and she's snide and she's a jerk and she's a really big voice. And it's perfect because that's how we're going to see Abby rise to the occasion. If Bellamy was just like kind of meek and like snide about things, the scene isn't going to rise to the level of elevation that you need it to for the conflict. Because you were telling us at the beginning when you were introducing the scene is Abby has a lot going on at the end of the book, and we have to show that opportunity to like rise to the occasion. So you need that really big voice from Bellamy. So okay. For you, great job. Huge shout out to you. For anybody listening, don't be afraid to make your side characters really big, because if your side characters are really big, it gives your readers the opportunity to see the main characters kind of get into their best selves or their worst selves in some instances. So, okay. So Abby didn't want to embarrass her friend by saying more, especially because Bellamy's bestie, again, I just added a little bit in there to help orient it. Abby wished her friend wasn't so sad so that they could laugh about how overdone the high fives were. You actually had it. They high-fived because they got there. It was a little overdone. So I just turned it around to make it in Abby's perspective. So then we've got Bellamy in her super privileged. If I get another shout out, can Cheryl come for ice cream with us? Again, this is all your stuff. None of this needed to change because it was like orienting the fact that Cheryl and Bellamy are kind of like, they think they're above everybody else. And then you do a really great job of introducing Clarissa. So the first line, center and captain, she rolled her eyes, right? So because Clarissa becomes really important in the scene. So now we're orienting the reader, the fact that there's somebody else who's important here, right? So then Mrs. Driscoll leaves and the door slams and then they're still getting ready. Bellamy was sorting her drinks. And then this is where the changes that I made stopped being so much about language and started being about the emotional intensity of the scene, ratcheting up in an accelerated pace. So what was happening was Bellamy and Jordan were having this conversation. They draw Abby and Jordan into it, and then they kind of backed off. And there was a little bit of like 12-year-old nastiness being pushed back and forth, but then it kind of didn't go anywhere. And then Bellamy would say something really nasty, and the response wasn't elevating it, even though the language that Bellamy was using was really like, somebody's going to respond this way. So I just moved some things around. So I added, Abby didn't like how much they were looking at Jordan. And then, hey, Jordan, exclamation points before hey and Jordan. Bellamy used that sing-songy voice everybody hated. You don't have to use that. That was editorial liberty. But again, something to like orient the reader that Bellamy's about to be Bellamy.
Super nasty.
Right? Too bad about your brother. Jordan gasped, her fingers hesitated on the strap. This is all you. But she didn't look up. She didn't speak. The conversation around the bench trickled to a whisper. Again, really great orienting the reader to what's happening. Ain't you got anything to say? Bellamy, when Bellamy was slang, she was trying to sound cool. Again, that was really great. This is where, to me, this is the opportunity for Abby to respond and set the stage that, hey, because this is Abby's story, right? So Abby's going to need to get involved. Shut up, Bellamy, Abby warned. Just because she didn't know what was going on didn't mean she was going to let her friend be treated that way, especially not by Bellamy. Again, I took some editorial liberties here, thinking about the way you've talked about Abby and what her actions are, just helping the reader to see that, yeah, we need to root for Abby. Not that we didn't know we needed to root for Abby because we've seen Abby in other scenes and because Bellamy is clearly the little brat that everybody wants to stomp on. Everybody had a Bellamy on their team too, right? Like every hockey team had a Bellamy, right? Okay, so they went back to whispering amongst themselves because again, we want to give it a little bit of space. Bellamy tries something, Abby shuts her down. There's a little bit of space. But then the scene needs to continue. So I just took what you were saying and I moved some things around, and you can actually see because it's actually green now. So they went back to whispering amongst themselves. Abby thought she heard words, freak and so sad. So rather than the language where we were actually seeing, it was actually, I think, Cheryl saying, your brother's a freak, it's so sad. Mm-hmm. If somebody says your brother's a freak, it's so sad, that's going to end in punches, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to pull it back to give a little bit more distance to wait for the big fight scene at the end. So rather than making it really loud to everyone, this is where we can take the Clarissa line that you had a little bit later and say, Bellamy, you think it's smart to make the best D-line mad right before a game against the Amazons? Bellamy needs to kind of respond to that, because before it ended in like a fight. But if we move it up here, then Bellamy can be like, we're not trying to make anybody mad. And Cheryl, of course, can be like, yeah, we're just talking, right? Like with talking in italics, right? See, I told you my superpower was talking like 12-year-olds, right? Like I speak 12-year-old. Sadly, I think it's because when I turned 12, like I stopped growing, maturing, whatever. So,
Okay.
and now Clarissa can talk about being late. There was something earlier about being late to the ice. Clarissa, because Clarissa, you've identified that she's the captain, right? So she needs to say, all right, enough, less talking, you can't be late again. Now you told us about Bellamy and the pads, so I had to bring it in here. I've got twice the gear everyone else does, Bellamy whines. The whole team can be like, we know, and they can laugh. Abby starts to relax. She elbowed Jordan and smiled. Well, Bellamy shot back at Clarissa, you had this really great stuff about a sports bra and undershirt, whatever. It was really cute, but it was like happening right in the middle. Like Cheryl had said something about Jordan's brother, and Jordan's response was, you're not even wearing a sports bra, you're wearing a t-shirt. It didn't feel balanced. I think everything is a movie to me, you know. It's like in The Untouchables where they're like, are you going to bring a gun to a knife fight, right? Like put one in the hospital, I put one in the morgue, right? Like that whole idea, like it's going to escalate. You say something about my brother, I'm not going to talk about your sports bra. I'm going after you. Either I'm going after your family or I'm going to come after you physically. So I just moved this scene around because so selfishly, as an editor, my instinct was cut this part of the scene, but it was so cute. I was like, no, we got to make this work because it's so how 12-year-old girls talk in a locker room, right? Like it felt like it needed to stay, so it just needed to be moved.
Okay.
So rather than Jordan saying it to Cheryl, I actually have Bellamy using it at Clarissa. That's not a sports bra, it's an undershirt. Good one, Belle, someone said. She's not wrong. Someone else commented, but it's cute. And the team went back to dressing, right? Like this idea that like, okay, in a locker room, there can be like these fits and they can lower, and there can be fits and they can be lowered as long as somebody didn't cross a line. So then to show a little bit of passage of time, I added that girls are finishing and heading to the ice. Abby and Jordan were just about to head out, which if they're about to leave, Cheryl and Bellamy know that this is their last opportunity to really escalate. So now is where we're going to, from this moment forward, we're going to push and we're going to escalate because you've got to fight at the end. So we need to go from everybody's kind of chill. We had a couple of bumps, but we always have a couple of bumps because Bellamy's a brat, to we're going to fight. So now everything's going to escalate. So this line that you had earlier about Jordan's brother. So instead of Cheryl saying it directly to Jordan this time, I made it to be, I heard Cheryl said a little too loudly, he's been gone 3 days. And again, I italicized 3 because 3 is important. Jordan clenched her fist. You don't talk about him. She whispered. We had her shouting it before, but like she's so angry, like she can't articulate it. So then, and I didn't add Bellamy back in here. Well, my dad says you can't tell anymore. Those die freaks could. You had her saying like they could do this, they could do that. But the minute she calls the dyads a freak, Abby's done, right? So you had this really great thing about she couldn't help it, the water bottle, but it came like, I don't know, a page and a half later. Mm-hmm. There was another inciting moment, but I just took it and I moved it up here. So Abby couldn't, she grabbed the water bottle, it was right beside her. She put the stream over all of them. I added, I said, shut up in the middle of that because she's not going to just do it without saying anything. It was beautiful. Cheryl got most of it. She squealed, she jumped. the girls between them backed up on the bench, and even Abby had to smile. Yeah, someone cheered. Bitch, Cheryl said. Sorry, content alert there for readers. Or listeners, excuse me, you're not reading it yet. Bellamy reacted faster than she ever did on the ice, right? Like, so you need the confrontation to be between Bellamy and Abby. But Cheryl's the one who took the brunt of the water. So Cheryl's going to be the one in the fight. So you need to find a way for Bellamy to get in front of Cheryl. So I just added, and again, total editorial liberties. If you don't like it, take it out. But she reacted faster than she ever did on the ice. She grabbed the back of Cheryl's shirt and stepped to Abby. And then I created this line where she's going to antagonize Abby here and go, because right now, up to this point, it hasn't been about Abby. It's been about Jordan. Abby's just like collateral damage. But now Abby's in the middle of it. She's the one who reacted. So Bellamy needs to be like, of course, you have something to say about it, right? Because now it's personal. So then Abby can say, you want to be careful about what you want to say next. Bellamy can step to her and be like, turning to Cheryl and be like, so should I tell her what my dad says next? Instead of going directly into it, right? Like she's baiting, right? Like she knows, Bellamy, brat or not, she knows how to read a room. She knows how to needle. Right? Like, so she's going to play that to her advantage. So Cheryl, who of course is still butthurt because she got wet, tell her the room went silent, and then good riddance to bad rubbish, articulating every word. And then all hell breaks loose, right? So this is where the fight happens. Yes, 2 O's there, right? So instead of the back and forth about like, they say something about Jordan's brother, and then there's the fight about the t-shirt versus the sports bra. And then there's this about you can't tell anymore, and there's an action. And then Clarissa gets involved and talks about not antagonizing the line, right? Like it has to be, because once this line about the brother happens, right? Like once somebody says something specific, the fight's going to happen. Yeah. It's brewing. And then you've got the great scene with the coach, but if it's okay, this is where I want to stop.
Yep, that's
for
great.
Today.
Oh, that's great.
All right. Thoughts, questions, comments?
No, I need to think about it, but I really like how you've smoothed this out and you've been able to kind of pick through it so logically.
Well, I mean, that's an editor's job, right? Like our job is to take what your vision as the writer is and polish it so that the reader doesn't have to think. The reader can just feel. If you want them to be in the moment, it's kind of like the difference between adults and children, right? Not to say that readers are children. That's not what I'm saying at all. But like this idea of entertainment happens more easily when we can just feel stuff. It helps remind us of what it was like when we were a kid and we didn't have to think about things. We didn't have to worry about how we were going to get groceries and who was going to do the dishes and whether we had clean laundry, right? Like somebody else took care of that for us. That's part of what the joy is in reading, is that we can just be in the moment and not have to worry about the rest of it. So our job as editors is to take your emotional content and smooth it out so the reader doesn't have to think about where everybody is in the room. We just help you place people in the room so that the story beats make sense. Obviously, I took a ton of editorial liberties here. You as the author are welcome to keep every one of my changes if you want and move on. Or you can look at them and be like, Laura, I get what you're saying here, but this is not the way it would happen, and back them out and put in whatever you want. That is your job, I guess, as the author, is to review editors' notes and make changes or accept them, whatever. Different authors, and this now, Faye, is more for our listeners than it is for you, because I know you already know this. But there's kind of a thought process in the writing world about like fear of working with an editor, because what if I don't agree with the editor? Well, you don't have to agree with the editor. The editor's job isn't to be right all the time. As much as I love being right all the time, it's not my job to be right. My job is to offer you as the author options for what you can do to make things smoother. Now, it might work differently in the traditional publishing world where the editor is like the end all and be all of like what makes it into print. But at this type of writing, this type of relationship here, my job isn't to make the decisions for you as the author. My job is to give you options about what you can do and how you can take things here in other scenes to like get you to the place where you want to go. So when we disagree, oftentimes that just gives you as the author the opportunity to like see a new avenue in what your story can do. So,
and that's usually how it works, you know, like most of the time. Like the moving around and the smoothing the flow, absolutely, you know, I totally respect how you do that because I can't see it sometimes. But a lot of times I will take a step beyond the dialogue that you've offered and do something else with it.
Yep. And that's where you're the author and I'm the editor. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing for a second. You know, you all have, anybody who has listened to more than one episode with me on it has probably heard me say, like, I can't create, right? Like you set the stage here. I can fill in the blanks of what could have happened in this moment, but that's not creating, right? Like that's drawing on experience to be like, oh, and then this happened this one time and this happened this one time, to give you placeholders for you to go back in and be like, okay, that might have happened there, but this isn't what happens in my characters, right? So that, that's how that's supposed to work. So I love that you take those suggestions and options and really make them your own as the author, because at the end of the day, it's your story. And it really should be my job as I said this in the podcast that we did with Amy, right? Like my name never goes on your book and I don't want it to go on your book because that's not what my job is. My job is to offer you support in helping you create your vision of a book. So I often, as I did today, take editorial liberties and just kind of throw stuff in there, sometimes as placeholders. Sometimes I'm really good about being like, hey, this is a placeholder. And other times I just want the scene to move and I get lost in it and forget that, hey, this is a placeholder. So I always appreciate you letting me play with your scenes. So anyway, any last thoughts before I turn the recording off?
No, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And then I have to figure out how to turn this off.